Welcome to the Binge List. I'm your host, Paul Chappell. And guys, I've had a terrible time reviewing the newest season of Jessica Jones, which is also the final season. And I'll get to that in a minute, but let me just clear up some things. I love Jessica Jones. I love the first season. I'm all for the private investigator type show. I wish they would do more of that instead of doing all these police procedurals, because as you know, police officers aren't the best role models nowadays. But I feel like private investigators are very interesting. The idea of somebody going it alone and trying to investigate crimes without the resources that police officers have has always fascinated me. I mean, you go back to me reading about Philip Marlowe and The Big Sleep and all those Raymond Chandler type stories and Sam Spade, and I just love that whole genre, and we need more of it. So the fact that we had this character who is basically James Dean, let's be honest about it, is basically somebody's idea. They said, let's make a private investigator show or a comic, because it was originally a comic, let's be clear here. But it's kind of like somebody said, hey, let's do a private investigator show, but let's put James Dean as the main character, make him female with powers. And that's very interesting, because to be a female private investigator, you probably need powers. Just if you know anything about those stories, the private investigator always gets a little bit over his head. Like if you've seen Chinatown with Jack Nicholson, he gets his nose famously slit. He's a wreck by the end of that movie. So the idea of a female or a woman taking on that role is a little bit concerning, but you add superpowers in the mix, specifically the type of superpowers that Jessica Jones has, and it changed the whole dynamic. So I thought that really worked. But I watched this season and I was at a loss to what I mean, I liked it, but did I like it as much as the first season? No. And I was like, why don't I? Everything was written very well. The characters were well developed. Even the little side characters like Jerry Hogarth and Malcolm Ducasse. All those characters, even Trish Walker, everybody had some kind of arc this season, and they all worked to for the most part. I had a little problem with Malcolm's arc and some of his decisions that kind of didn't make sense, but other than that, even the little detective character on the series, and I forget his name. He played Ari on the Sopranos. A great actor, but Costa, the detective, was just he had a little story arc. So I was just satisfied with everybody's characterization this season, but there was just something missing. And if I look at my viewership of the Marvel Netflix series, they're kind of inconsistent. I didn't watch any of the Iron Fist seasons. I watched all of Daredevil seasons, but none of the Iron Fist seasons. I watched first season of Luke Cage, and I didn't watch. I watched about half of the first season of Punisher before I quit. So I was like, what did those seasons of Daredevil and that first season of Luke Cage and the seasons of Jessica Jones, which I watched, what did they all have in common that made me want to watch them? And I racked my brains for it. And what it really came down to, I concluded, was the fact that all of those seasons had interesting villains. In the case of Luke Cage, I knew Mahershala Ali was going to be the villain. In fact, after he dies midway through the first season, the show kind of goes down the drain. So I looked at Daredevil, and same thing. The fact that I found out Vincent D'Onofrio was going to play Kingpin was the deciding factor in me watching that show. I mean, I love Vincent D'Onofrio. I've loved him since Full Metal Jacket. So if you looked at the reasons I watched certain Netflix Marvel shows, it all had to do with the villain. And even when I found out the first season of Jessica Jones was going to have the Purple Man himself as the main villain, the guy with mind control powers. I mean, as far as I used to do thought experiments when I was younger about what would be the best superpower, and I kind of only believe that you should have one superpower. If we're going to be believable about superheroes, it doesn't make sense for Superman to have be able to fly and shoot laser beams out of his eyes and have cold breath or whatever it is, and have super strength. It doesn't really. That's why Superman is a little bit overpowered. He really should only have one great superpower. So I did these thought experiments when I was younger. What would be the ultimate one superpower? If you could choose, what would that be? Would it be super strength? I mean, we have some heroes that have that as their sole superpower. That's the primary reason I like the Fantastic Four. You got one guy who's very, very strong. You got one guy who can control flames. You got another character that can stretch. And then you got another character that's invisible. So I always thought that was the way to go about it with superheroes. But I think I concluded one of the ultimate powers you could have as a superhero would be mind control. And in the first season, we had a character with that sole power, and it was freaking awesome. And that first season was just so engrossing because that villain was so overpowered. With all the powers that Jessica Jones had, she still had to face the fact that this guy could just take over her at any second and use her as a weapon as he did. And that just fascinated me. And that just made that first season. And I felt like this final season did not have that tutelar villain. In fact, I think it takes about 4 episodes before you even get an inkling of who the villain is. And spoilers, it turns out to be just a serial killer, not a serial killer with special powers, just a serial killer, just your run-of-the-mill serial killer. So I was kind of disappointed by that. It was a little interesting. The serial killer kind of has his own philosophy on why he kills people, and he feels kind of justified at killing people. One thing you find out about him is that he hates superheroes. He thinks they're cheaters or whatever. But he was kind of interesting, but at the same time, I felt like they should have given him one kind of superpower. And I understand he's a character from the comics. I'm not discounting that, but I just felt like his character would have worked a lot better if he had some superpower that kept Jessica Jones from immediately just swatting him, because that was the inherent problem of this season. That through every episode, I kept thinking to myself, why didn't Jessica Jones just swat this guy? Because at any time she could have swatted this guy and the threat would have been over. And she did it in some of the other seasons. I know she was on this kick of not trying to kill people this season, but I just felt that kind of unbelievable, kind of trite and contrived. So I felt like they could have gone another way. Ultimately, I felt like Trish Walker turns out to be the bigger villain this season, because she kind of goes off the deep end. She's trying to be a superhero like Jessica Jones. In fact, she's trying to be a superhero, not really like Jessica Jones. She's just trying to be a superhero with, capital letters. because I don't think Jessica Jones has ever considered herself a real superhero. And she's never really exploited her powers that way. And Trish Walker feels like when she does get those powers, and just for people that don't know, who don't read comic books, Trish Walker is Hellcat in the comic books. And I don't remember how she gets her powers. I don't really know the history of Hellcat, but she is a character from the comics. And when Trish Walker gets those powers, she gets them at the end of season 2. And I just felt like I like that character arc of someone discovering that they have powers and wanting to use it for good, and then finding out that there is a line that you can cross when you become a superhero. Particularly in her case, when someone she really likes or loves gets murdered. There's this fine line between being a superhero and being a vigilante. And that gets explored. That was a very interesting arc. That's probably the most interesting arc all season, was the one with Trish Walker. And like I said, I felt like she was a true villain. And I have to respect the way they did it, and that they had, I guess now that I think about it, the serial killer was really a red herring. So ultimately, Trish was the villain because the serial killer was there to push her over the edge. Even though they have to come up with ways to ultimately catch him in the end. But even after they, and this is a very big spoiler. So if you haven't watched the season and you don't want the progression of the season spoiled for you in any way, I would fast forward maybe a minute or so. But they captured the actual serial killer, like, I think it was like 10 episodes into the season. And I got to that point and said, I was like, wait. There's 3 episodes left and they've already captured the villain. So that told me from that point forward that, hey, something's going to happen with Trish. And I was right. Trish kind of escalates her ne'er-do-welling hero escapades, and it goes bad for her. So she ultimately does become the villain, and Jessica Jones has to deal with the fact that someone she considers a sister has turned to the dark side. So I thought that was an interesting arc. So maybe from that perspective, I would say it was a good season. I wouldn't say it was a great season, not like season 1, because I like it. Ultimately, a villain with mind control just trumps anything else you can come up with. And I think they were battling that reality a little bit in the second season. They tried to overcome that problem by bringing Jessica's mother into the fold and giving her basically the same powers that Jessica has. But ultimately, I just think they did so well in the first season that they were fighting the fact that that they wasted that villain. In fact, I don't even think they should have killed the Kilgrave that first season. As you probably know if you watched the first season, she pretty much breaks his neck. I thought it would have been much more interesting because he's a mind control. He controls people with words. I thought it would have been a lot more interesting if she had actually like torn out his tongue or something. And that by this season, they could have brought him back and maybe he got some kind of implant or something so that he could use his powers again. I thought that would have been very, very interesting if they had gone that route. But they don't call me for these. You know, hey, you guys in Hollywood, y'all really should call me for ideas. Yeah, I would do it for free, guys, if it would make these shows any better. Especially those guys that wrote Game of Thrones. But let me not get on that tangent. But ultimately, you've come here for one reason and one reason only. Would I recommend you putting this on your binge list? And I would say yes. it wasn't, like I said, it did not live up to the expectations I had for season 1 or at the end of season 1, but it was very interesting. If you want well-developed characters, this is the show for you. There's a lot of great actors. I mean, you got Rebecca De Mornay in this season. I mean, and really all the seasons, but she's a very attractive woman who aged very well. I mean, I probably had a crush on her at some point during her career. Probably back in her, what was that movie she did, Sleeping with the Enemy, or not Sleeping with the Enemy? Hand That Rocks the Cradle. She was just great in that film. She did Risky Business. I mean, she just did a bunch of, she was the hot item probably a couple of decades ago. But you got Carrie Ann Moss, who I definitely had a crush on during her Matrix days. She plays one of the most interesting, multifaceted characters I've ever seen on a show. The thing she does to find that love of her life when she finds out she has ALS this season was very fascinating. And you got Rachel Taylor playing Trish Walker. She was great. She added so many dimensions to Trish Walker. I mean, everybody, the cast was just stellar this season. I can't think of one character who was miscast. Even the serial killer, which I didn't really like, but even he was perfectly cast. But I would say put it on your binge list. Watch it. I felt like they could have toned down the number of episodes. Did we really need 13 episodes? Probably not. They probably could have did it in 10. But anyway, you got something extra special to watch with 13 episodes. They kind of gave them room to fill in a lot of the blanks for some of the characters, knowing that this was going to be their last season because, as you probably know, Disney has revoked the rights that Netflix had to these characters. So they had to end it. But like I said, watch it, enjoy it. I give it a solid recommend. And that's all I got for today. I would like to thank my subscribers. And if you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Give me a like. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think. And until next time, I will see you when I see you. Thanks for watching.